Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very informative show coming right up with special guest, Dr. Paul Thomas. And he's here today to share with us his new book, The Addiction Spectrum, a compassionate, holistic approach to recovery. Dr. Thomas received his MD from Dartmouth Medical School. He's a board-certified fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics and received a diploma from the American Board of Addiction Medicine. He has taught residents and medical students from 1988 to 1993, and he has practiced pediatrics for over 30 years. In 2008, he opened Integrative Pediatrics, where he currently serves over 13,000 patients. And in 2009, he started Fair Start Clinic, where he's helped over 500 patients with opioid addiction. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. Paul Thomas.
Well, thank you, Marianne, for having me on your show.
What a pleasure it is to have you here. Your book is so timely, The Addiction Spectrum. I mean, my goodness, I think everybody should have a copy of this book because it really breaks all these things that we thought we knew about addiction.
Well, that's what I think. I have my own personal story with addiction that I'm sure we can get into if you want. But besides that, I'm an addiction specialist. I work with primarily the younger generation, sort of 30 years old and under, trying to help them get off of heroin, especially. That's my real area of specialization. But this book I wrote because addiction, I'm also a very busy board-certified pediatrician, so I have those two areas of expertise, as well as integrative medicine. And I sort of started to understand there's an intersection here for addiction with bad habits, with obsessions, and there's a method that we can all apply in our lives so that we sort of protect ourselves from moving along what I call the addiction spectrum, which is why I titled the book The Addiction Spectrum. And that is, we start off, none of us are born unless our moms happen to have been, addicted to heroin or alcohol at the time of our pregnancy, our delivery. We're not born addicted. So we all start at a 0 or a 1 risk factor, and then like any chronic disease, things might push you along that spectrum to the very severe end where, depending on the substance, you're very incapacitated, if not dead.
Yeah. Well, and, I think it would be appropriate to share a little bit of your story with our listeners because when people look at you, you're this really successful doctor. It seems that you've got this great book. You have it all together, and so I think that a lot of times when people look at, gosh, I'm dealing with opiates or drinking or overeating or what have you, it's hard to maybe for them to say, well, you know what, this guy's got it all together. What does he know about me?
Right. Well, here's the thing. My own story, let's just start there. And it also affected a lot of my family members, and those stories are interwoven in the book along with several stories from patients that I've treated and am treating. Names changed, of course. But my own story was a missionary kid in Africa, just a delightful childhood, really had no access to drugs, alcohol, even cigarettes. I was very, very isolated, and it was a very amazing childhood, honestly. I couldn't look back. When I later discovered I was an alcoholic, I kept looking back at my life going, why? Because there was no clear cut, you could say. A lot of people who have addictions can look back and they had abusive childhoods, they were neglected, they had some major trauma. A lot of people will find a reason, and in my case, there just was no good reason. And we can get into that later, but fast forward many years, I get to college, I discover beer, and I loved the effect. So I'll often tell people, if you don't understand the addict in your life, their behavior, they're treating something, right? So the addictive behavior or the addictive substance is actually initially the solution for something. So in my case, in retrospect, I was an anxious kid. I just didn't know it, right? That's who I was. That's how I was. I dealt with it the best I could. But I was a very high-energy, anxious kid. So when I found, in my case, alcohol, it was sort of this, oh, that's better. And I wanted that feeling more and more and more. So because I was so motivated to be successful, I mean, just the way I was raised, the way I'm wired, I ended up, getting into Dartmouth Medical School, becoming a board-certified pediatrician. But all along that journey from college to medical school through residency and then out into practice, my drinking progressed. I was moving along the spectrum of severity. It used to be just one night a week when I was in college. And then it was small amounts during the week and a lot more on the weekends in med school. And then in residency, I didn't drink if I was on call, but I drank most other days. And then by the time I was in practice, I was able to not drink if I was on call until at the very end, I was even breaking that self-established rule and was drinking daily. But I looked good on the outside, right? Nobody knew that inside I had this ongoing battle. And towards the end, if you've ever struggled, if you're listening here and you've struggled with an addiction, you know the feeling of self-loathing and just that despair. In my case, I never got to that jumping off point they talk about where you're suicidal, but for a lot of people, that's where you end up because you want so badly now to stop this self-destructive behavior, but you can't seem to find a way to do it. And so I think there's a lot of, maybe for listeners who don't quite relate to alcohol or heavy-duty drugs, maybe you can relate to food. So how many times, I've certainly struggled with this, how many times have you thought to yourself, I've got to eat more fruits and vegetables, I need to stop, I've got to put down the sugar, I've got to put down these cookies, the breads, the processed foods. And maybe you can do it for a short while, but then you're back to it. It's a very similar phenomenon, sort of on a low level. It's craving when you don't have the substance that your body's become accustomed to.
Well, and it's so interesting. So many people, I'm sure, can relate to that. Either, we've gone through addiction ourselves, be it food, electronics, you name it. Or we know somebody who's going through it. It touches everybody. And when I read your book, one of the things that really stuck with me, because a lot of people think, well, these people, that are doing this, they have no willpower or they're just predisposed genetically to this.
Yeah. No. So that myth about willpower. So here I am, a successful doctor. I was leading case conferences, teaching all the local doctors in the community. I was up front, and yet I had this problem, right? So I could set my mind on just about anything and I could accomplish it, but I could not stop drinking. What the heck was that? What happens is it's willpower that leaves the moment your addictive substance enters your body. So in my case, the moment I put a drink to my lips, willpower would be gone. And people who are familiar with 12-step programs will know that you're told it's that first drink, right? It's that first substance use that gets you going, because most of us who become addicted to something, we don't have an off switch. It even applies to food. Think of that bag of Oreos and you were just going to have one, or the potato chips and you were just going to have a small handful. Once you have that addictive substance in your body, you're off and running. So it really is a physiological, biological process that gets activated, and you've lost that ability to have choice in the matter. Now, in the very, very beginning, it's certainly there are people who choose to never drink, right? And that's awesome. And kudos to you. Keep it up. But most people experiment, and then if they're vulnerable for whatever reason, they find themselves in a real dilemma. Or you could take the opiate example. My wife's story is a good one for this. She had multiple major surgeries. The most horrendous jaw surgeries you can imagine. Transplants into her jaw. They finally transplanted her toes into her jaw. The recoveries from these multiple surgeries were months long. Lots of pain meds required. And she first you become physically dependent to the medication, the opiates. And then she was just dependent and addicted. And what happens once you're addicted to your substance, when you try to stop, the withdrawal symptoms are so rough, especially with things like opiates and alcohol and meth. You're just left so depleted of your dopamine, the neurochemicals in your brain that would help you be able to just be alert and function, that you resort back to your drug just to survive. So now to talk about willpower and somebody who's in that state, they're so dependent on that chemical, is almost cruel. But people feel that hopelessness and that desperation, and people feel judged. So, if you have cancer and you're dealing with that, everybody's all, very sympathetic, as they should be. But if you have addiction, you're kind of like written off as a loser. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to break that stigma and get this thing out in the open because, folks, people are struggling out there. We have 45 million Americans are addicts or alcoholics. Half of that number are in recovery. And I would say a third of the families in this country is affected by addiction in some way. We know somebody, we have a family member who's struggling or has died from addiction. I know the media is just full of all the opioid overdoses, and it's a crisis. 2016, we had 63,000 drug overdose deaths. 2017, it was 72,000 drug overdose deaths, and 30,000 of those were from fentanyl. Fentanyl is a new synthetic opioid that's 100 times the potency of morphine. And there's a new type of fentanyl called carfentanil. It's basically elephant tranquilizer that is 1,000, or I think it's 10,000 times the potency of morphine. I mean, a grain of salt of that stuff will probably kill you.
Wow. I mean, it's just amazing what's out there, and just to be aware of what's going on, because, I mean, we do have a culture that is just suffering, and we need to be able to, I think your book, The Addiction Spectrum, really helps people to not only look at it in a different way, but how we can also look at how we can heal this as well.
Right. And so, the headlines are captured by all the deaths and overdoses, but I like how you put it. People are suffering. And our children today, if you're a parent or you're a teenager yourself, they're unaware of the fact that their brains are becoming hijacked by things like obviously the sugar and the food, but the cell phones, the screen time. I've got a story I just want to share with your listeners because this patient came to me after the book was submitted, and I wasn't able to get the story into the book, but it's so dramatic. I'd like to share it. So a few months ago, I had a 16-year-old young lady come into my office, extremely depressed. I mean, that kind of depression where you can't even fake a smile, just, no ability to interact besides just And she had seen a psychiatrist, was on 2 medications. She was suicidal. She could no longer get out of bed to go to school. No focus at all. And this had been a young lady I'd known since birth. She came from a family they were smart, they were athletes, and she was an athlete and a great student up until this depression started a few months prior. So I look over her situation, and there's nothing wrong except for this depression, and make a couple adjustments to her medications. Long story short, she comes back a month later looking perfect. I mean, absolutely animated, happy. I'm thinking, what the heck happened? So I'm asking her, what changed? What happened here? Oh, I don't know. You changed my medicine a little bit, she says. And then, no, something else happened. Then the mom says, well, remember, honey, after we left the office last time, you had that concussion. She was a soccer player, and she had gone out to play soccer and had severe concussion where she was placed on complete brain rest. So no school, no phone, no TV, no friends over, no reading, total brain rest, and her brain healed. I thought to myself, I've never seen such a dramatic healing. So I asked her, how much time were you spending on your phone? Oh, quite a lot, she said. I said, well, how much is quite a lot? Probably too much. How much is probably too much? 7 or 8 hours a day on school days. More, almost continuously on the weekends. And the Pew Research Institute 2018 report says just that. 45% of young adults and teens spend basically almost every waking moment on a device. So here's what I think is happening, and I want your listeners to understand that this is really worth paying attention to and being intentional about how much we're exposing our brains to screens and stress. And we're animal kingdom creatures wired to scan for danger. And we don't make a distinction between being attacked by a lion, bear, or some very dangerous situation and that little alert that comes across your screen, or if you're playing video games, it's constant little tiny stimuluses of fight or flight, danger response. And we're just trashing our brains. They can get to the point where they're not doing well, just as if you were addicted to heroin or morphine or alcohol or something else. So it's definitely worth paying attention to.
It sounds like it is. And I like how there's also a way to heal the brain, with the rest and just kind of scaling back on the devices because that's such a powerful story, and it really gives such a great example of what the possibilities are for people.
Yes. So for those who are listening and maybe you're starting to think, maybe I can make some changes in my life that would help me, this book will guide you on that process, but I'll give you a bird's eye view, kind of the crib notes of what you've got to do. It sounds easy, but folks, it's a process. I've been on this process of lifestyle changes in my own life, and it's an ongoing thing. You don't just wake up and boom, you've got it all figured out. So number one, work on your diet, your nutrition, so that you're eating real food, preferably organic. We're talking produce. If it came from a factory, if it's in a box, a bag, a can, it's not from the earth like you really want it. You want fresh, real produce, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds. If you can get free-range meats, all the better. So that's number one. Number two is there are certain nutrients that we're all deficient. The most obvious one is vitamin D. And lately there have been a few articles in the press saying this vitamin D thing is overblown. Don't get hoodwinked by that. There are hundreds and hundreds of articles showing that if your vitamin D level is optimal, you have better immune system, but less cancer, lots of things. Asthma is reduced. So many inflammatory processes, immune system related processes are helped with vitamin D, and we're all just hopelessly deficient. So check your levels if you wish, but make sure you're always taking some vitamin D. I like people to get their levels up to 50 to 80 nanograms per deciliter. The normal range for most physicians that will be quoted is 30 to 100, and most people are walking around with vitamin D levels in the teens or possibly even single digits. I've had two moms in my practice who are athletes. These are young women who broke their femurs. This is the big bone in your leg, running. They're athletes, and it just snapped running. Turns out their vitamin D level was in the single digits. Vitamin D helps you store calcium in your bones. I prefer that you take a vitamin D that has K2 because that way you're getting that calcium that you're absorbing to go where it belongs, which is into the bones. And most vitamin D supplements do not have K2, so that's just something to be aware of. So we've got real food. We're going to supplement vitamin D. If you're vegetarian, you need to supplement B12. And there are ways, integrative medicine doctors, functional medicine doctors, naturopaths, other physicians, and people who are aware of nutrients can help you figure out perhaps others that you need. A B complex is often worth doing. You need B12 if you're a vegetarian, as I said. Now, the X factor, I think, other than toxins, which you want to avoid toxins in all ways, but the X factor is stress. And just like we were talking about that young lady whose brain really just shut down from the stress of the cell phones, that constant screen time, that's a big one to think about. But there are a lot of stressors in our lives that maybe we're not really acknowledging or doing what we possibly could to reduce stress. One obvious one I'll share with you is the news. If you watch the news, it's not usually filled with feel-good stories, right?
Yeah, not at all.
The sky is falling, and usually it's something there's nothing we can do about it, so it leaves you feeling anxious because it's like, oh, my goodness, right? So just turn it off. I was driving to work one day this past year listening to NPR, which I'll sometimes do, and they were talking about who had a bigger button, right? So North Korea and the U.S., and they were going off on that. And I started feeling anxious, thinking, oh, my goodness, nuclear war? And I thought, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. And I reached over, switched to music, and my stress level was instantly from very high to like, that's better. So we need to pay attention to what we're exposing our brains to in terms of stress. A great stress reducer is exercise, and it's really important for so many levels of our physiology and being healthy to get some daily exercise. If you're not used to exercising, just start with a slow walk. Do something that gets you moving until you're finally actually able to do some short bursts of intensive exercise. Find something you can enjoy, too. If you can do it with others, it really helps. There's a CrossFit craze going on right now that one of my sons kind of conned me into, he encouraged me. And I've actually, my wife, who is a couch potato, is now a CrossFit maniac, and she is transforming herself. It's so fun to see. So, but it doesn't have to be something that extreme if you think that's extreme. Just find something that you'll do that'll get you moving. Sleep is the other thing. A lot of us are not getting enough sleep. So there's a lot to be said about how to make sure you've got good sleep hygiene, and I won't get into that necessarily right here and now, but look into that. And then probably with regards to addiction, the other most important thing that I like to point out, and that's your community. There's an internal community, which is your biome, your healthy bacteria, eating fermented foods. Some people are doing kombucha. There's all sorts of ways of getting a healthy biome going, probiotics. But the community I'm really talking about, if you're struggling with any kind of an addiction or you're headed down that addiction spectrum, is supportive, nurturing people. So what we tend to do when we're becoming addiction is we tend to isolate. And isolation is not a good thing for us when we're getting stuck on a substance or an addiction of some kind. I talk about in my book the rat part experiments. Can I share that story? Just take a couple minutes.
Oh, take your time, yeah.
Okay. So the scientists in Canada in the 80s took caged rats. They were in solitary confinement, basically, right? That's usually how they store research rats. They each have their own cage. And he gave them the option of drinking regular water or morphine water. And these rats would drink the morphine water, most of them to the point that they died. So they got the feel-good effect. They loved it. They just kept going back for more, until they just stopped breathing and died. Well, then he took similar rats and put them in a big, he called it rat park. So he created this huge cage that had places to play, to hide, to mate, lots of playmates. Rats are community creatures just like humans. And the rats would completely avoid the morphine water and always just choose the regular water. To make it even more clear, he would get rats addicted to morphine, put them in the rat park, and they would still choose to detox and go to the water rather than going back to the morphine because of their withdrawal symptoms. And it just speaks to the power of community. And human beings, we're communal creatures. We're meant to be in community with others. And the device that you have that's connecting you socially, it's not the same, folks. You need human touch, human interaction, eyeball to eyeball in real life. I'll tell people in my office sits a little bit up from the surrounding area, so you can look out in the distance and see trees. And I'll say, look out in the distance and look at those trees. Now look down at your screen. What was the feeling you got in your brain? And it's completely different. There's something soothing about a landscape or a forest, and there's something stressful about a screen in your face. So it's just something that we need to pay attention to.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Dr. Paul Thomas in regards to his new book, The Addiction Spectrum, a compassionate, holistic approach to recovery. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 123 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest Dr. Paul Thomas, and he's sharing with us his new book, The Addiction Spectrum, a compassionate, holistic approach to recovery. So, Dr. Thomas, before we left for break, there's a question that kind of popped up I was thinking about here. So, do you feel that the reason we're going through such a crisis with so many different addictions happening at this point in our history is maybe because people feel disconnected and alone?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's probably the number one thing, besides just the fact that our bodies are, basically poisoned with all the toxins in our world, from food to the air we breathe to the water we drink. We're undernourished. But besides that, this isolation piece is huge. And, when you're feeling that way, you're going to reach for a substance that just helps you feel better. And, almost anything will do, whether it's your screens, whether it's cigarettes, whether it's food, whether it's, alcohol, opiates, meth, anything that gives you a boost of your dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter in our brain that helps your focus, helps your feel good. And when you feel more focused, when you feel that little bit of euphoria that's just like, that's better, it's just it's a reward, right? And so we're wired to do things that are rewarding because evolutionarily there was a purpose to that, right? I mean, sex is pleasurable because if it wasn't, we wouldn't have anybody on the earth. Food is a good thing in moderation and when it's healthy food, because without it we die. But in excess, right, when you take processed foods that just flood the dopamine receptors because of all the sugar and flour that turns to sugar very quickly, you've got a problem. It tips that balance into a stressful one rather than the relief that it could have been and should have been.
Oh, that's so important, and I'm so appreciative that you've been sharing not just your work and your research with people, but I could see where this is changing lives and why you're getting the response you are from your book, just because of the information. And it's due. Because I think a lot of times when people look at, and I'm not knocking AA or anything like that, but when they look at some of these traditional ways of going through a recovery process, it can seem a little daunting.
Yes. Yeah, I think the 12-step programs, and I still go to meetings because it's a funny thing. You don't want to go. You'd rather watch a ball game or just stay home and relax. And then if you get a consistent pattern of going, just find a meeting that you feel okay in. After a while, I always leave feeling glad that I went because I hear something. And it's just that community support, right? You're not alone. Others are struggling with what you're struggling with. And honestly, the amount of wisdom you'll hear, even from a brand new person that just walks through the door and they're just struggling, that despair, it's a reminder of where you were. So it has value. But my book, very sort of strategically or specifically, I chose not to have it be a 12-step kind of a book because there's lots and lots of books like that. And I really wanted to write a book that could resonate for anybody, just common sense, and yet we've lost the understanding and knowledge that we have the power to heal our bodies. I think for those who might be listening who are struggling, I think back to my story, and I'll just share something. It was the year was 2000, and I was cleaning out the shed in my backyard to get some camping gear ready to take the family on a camping trip. And I came across one of those. I used to do New Year's resolutions, and I would do a dream board every New Year's, and I'd put on there all the things I wanted to accomplish, the places I wanted to go, and I always sort of made it a pyramid-like structure with the number one thing at the top. And I'm staring at this board in the year 2000 from 1989, so 11 years prior. It was beautifully done. I'm thinking, wow, this is a masterpiece. But right at the top, it said, stop drinking. So this is 11 years later. I mean, I froze because I realized I was still drinking. And in fact, my drinking was worse than ever. So that just speaks to the difficulty. I mean, I just remembered actually last night something. I knew we were going to have this interview, and I was just thinking about it. And I remembered something I don't think I've told anyone, and that is, so I've been a church-going person in the past at various times of my life. I mean, I grew up a missionary kid. And I remember during this time of struggle when I was trying to stop drinking, going to the altar on my knees in a very charismatic church and being prayed over and just, turning it over, right? I mean, I was just, take this from me. I need to be free from this. And hours later, so I'm living in Oregon at the time where I am now, and at that time, I don't even know if you can buy alcohol on Sundays these days because I haven't bought any alcohol in over 15 years. But back then, you couldn't buy alcohol on Sundays. I was digging through the trash can looking for a bottle of vodka I'd thrown away in disgust that morning as I went off to church. And later that afternoon, there I am. That is the insanity of addiction. That is the power and the hold it has over you when you're in that more severe end of the spectrum. Because you see, I was having withdrawal symptoms, and it felt horrible, and I knew a little bit of alcohol would help me feel better. And, of course, it does. So if you've taken your addiction to that level where you have significant withdrawal symptoms, my recommendation would be get help, right? Don't try to do this alone. It's very, very difficult. I'm not saying impossible, but pretty close if you've taken it to that extreme. So find an addiction counselor, find an addiction treatment center, find an addiction doctor. Depending on the substance you're addicted to, you may actually need some medical assistance in weaning down your dose. That's something I do in my clinic for the opiate-addicted folks. And don't feel like you're alone. There is help out there, more than you ever know. But what's keeping people from seeking that help? So my thought is this, because I've watched it in my own life and I've watched it in some of my kids, and I see it all the time in my practice. People have that wish, kind of that want. You want to get better, you want to do better, but you lack the willingness. What was it in 2000 for me that I noticed 11 years my number one goal had been to stop drinking, and yet I was still drinking. So I lacked the willingness. Sure, I went up to the altar because I was emotionally charged at the call to the altar to come turn your things over to God, right? And I'm not knocking God, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying I wasn't truly, honestly, 100% willing to do whatever. And so it just work on getting that willingness, right? The other thing I talk about in the book is probably in addition to willingness, the thing you need most is a burning, strong why. You want to know why you're going to do this, right? Do you have some burning desire of things you want to change in your life and a good reason to do it? Because it will get hard, right? If you've taken your addiction to the point where not having that substance or that behavior causes withdrawal symptoms, you've got to have enough reason to go through those symptoms and come out the other side a free person. And I often tell my patients in the addiction clinic, because so many of them have pain, they'll come and say, Doc, you don't understand. I have real pain. I say, oh, no, I do understand. I mean, I may not have the exact same pain you have, but I do understand. And I share with them, your pain will actually get better as we wean your dose of opiates. And to a person, that's exactly what happens. It totally baffles people because they've been trained to believe that the opiate is what's going to help their pain. And what's happened is you get higher and higher doses, you've recruited more pain receptors, opiate receptors. Now the slightest little pain is magnified and it feels horrible. Well, we can go the other direction and down-regulate those receptors so you're not so sensitive to pain. Sorry there, I went on a bit, Marianne, didn't I?
No, I'm glad you did because I really appreciate you sharing that. And it has me kind of thinking, I mean, so when we talk about people who are maybe millennials or younger kids, are they, because I know they aren't really gravitating towards like AA or those kind of groups as much, is there a reason for that?
So the studies show, and I know this from being a pediatrician and dealing with all the adolescent age group, the younger age group, those adolescents, millennials as you say it, they don't feel as comfortable in the group setting. And I think there's I know there's a much higher level of folks who struggle with anxiety. And a lot of that anxiety can be social anxiety. And so the group setting is just a stressful environment to begin with from the get-go. So a lot of times I will say for those who have social anxiety, which, by the way, I have myself, I didn't know I had this. This is a sort of a funny story. My previous book, I was with my same co-author, who's brilliant, by the way. She makes the book come alive. Jennifer Margulies, amazing. But she and I were about to present to a group of doctors and then another group and then another group. We had 3 talks lined up. And we're sitting there preparing our slides, and I'm getting more and more uptight. And she turns to me and says, you have social anxiety, don't you? And I said, no, I don't. And then I got to thinking about it. I mean, this is just 2 years ago. I'm 61 years old. So 59 years of my life, I lived with social anxiety and hadn't identified it. It just cracks me up, the amount of denial a person can have. And it doesn't change anything except I'm aware of it now, but it just was a crack up. But I think the youth are really experiencing this a lot. And whether it's because of our, connected world that actually disconnects us from others in a real, physical way, we just get more comfortable being slightly removed through our screen. I think that might have a lot to do with it. Most families don't have nice, big, extended families where you're around multiple generations. That's just such a rare thing anymore. Nuclear families are isolated. And so there are a lot of factors that make it such that we're not in bigger groups very much. And so I think that plays into why the younger folks aren't going to want to go to church or go to a 12-step meeting, which for your listeners, by the way, 12-step is not a religious organization at all. The God thing is just of your own understanding, which means it doesn't matter. You just make of that whatever you wish. So it's just basically a social group of support, and they've got some steps. They call them the 12 steps that, by the way, they're brilliant. People who've gone through those steps, as I have, will tell you that it was absolutely the thing that gave them a new freedom and a whole new we call it a toolbox. It's like, oh, that's how you deal with stress. That's how you deal with life, right? We're not born with an owner's manual that tells you how to deal with every little thing. So, yeah, it's definitely something if you can get yourself, if you're addicted to some major substance, for example, whether it's alcohol or opiates as just an example, and you're struggling, you've earned your seat, right? There's a saying, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking or a desire to stop using. Well, if you've got that desire, you're a member. You've earned your seat. You've paid your dues. Go claim it. But that said, what this book offers people is a way to start healing. So you may still need counseling. You may still need a doctor to help you detox if you're on one of the big things like opiates or a heavy alcoholic. You may still need that help. But real health, real healing from the inside that's going to be long-lasting and give you vibrant, just joy in life, like just that healthiness that carries you through till the end, that's a self job, right? I mean, you've got to fix your diet, make sure your nutrients are optimized, reduce stress, because stress, when I've got folks that I'm working with in the addiction world, we have something I call HALT. I didn't make this up. I learned it in the rooms, right? Hungry, angry, lonely, tired, HALT. These are 4 things to avoid, because when you're in the journey of trying to get away from an addictive substance or behavior, if you're hungry, you're going to be irritable. You're going to be more likely to turn back to what? Your substance of relief or your behavior that gives you relief. Angry. Same thing. You're irritable. You're looking for some way to get away from that anger. Loneliness. That's what we just been talking about. When you're lonely, you don't want to be lonely. Remember, we're animal kingdom creatures meant to be in community. And then tired. That's that. Take care of your sleep, because it is vital to feeling good. Anybody that's young and you've done a bunch of all-nighters for finals, you know. Or the meth addict that's been on a huge run and they don't sleep for days, their body just becomes destroyed. I mean, they sleep for 2-3 days, the brain's trying to recover. We need restorative sleep. So a nice mnemonic: HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, things to avoid. It will help you in your journey. But in the book, we cover a host of natural things you can do. Just chip away at them. Don't feel like, oh, I can't do all that. Make one little change and then make another. And then sometimes, like certainly with food for me, I make changes and then I slip into some old patterns of, oh, I love bread, I love pasta, and it's just not good for me. When I eat bread and pasta, the weight just packs on. And that's just my physiology. It's just not good for me. So there's lots of little things you can do. And the other thing is just don't feel alone in all of this. Find your tribe, as we say, right? If you felt isolated, you're not alone.
Yeah. Well, and that's why AA is such a great start for people, because they can, if they don't have a tribe, they don't have people that even know how to connect with them or support them, they can find that in AA with the people that attend.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are other similar support groups, but AA is certainly the most tried and true, and there's an AA meeting in every town and practically in the world. There's a meeting finder app. You can just put in where you're at, and it'll tell you the nearest meeting and when it's happening.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've got a couple more questions. I think we have time for just a few more questions here. Now, with when we look at people who are like highly successful, do they typically fall into a pattern where they could become, they're more likely to become addicted to something as opposed to maybe people who are not?
Well, addiction hits everybody. I think there's definitely, I think you're onto something here, because as I think about all the people I know who are in the rooms of 12-step programs, for example, there are a very large number of us who are highly, highly successful, high-energy people. And so there's definitely, we've heard the term workaholic, right? Mm-hmm. As I think back in my family history, the reason I was so puzzled when I was first realizing I was an alcoholic was that there weren't any alcoholics. I found out later through my mother that I had an aunt and an uncle or a couple uncles that were alcoholics, but I didn't know them. There was really very little family history, but there was, throughout my family history, was workaholics. I mean, to an extreme. The kind of people like my dad, my grandfather, always working, always. It just like we were talking about the people today who are always on a cell phone. My dad, my grandpa, always working till they die. I mean, that's just the way they were. And so I'm wired the same way. And now I no longer drink or do drugs, but I still work quite a bit. And I'm aware of that. And I'm trying to add a balance to my life by being aware of it. But here's something someone told me once, and I've thought about it. You know, we know that you have a tendency, if you become addicted to one thing, to just replace that addiction with something else. So if you're an alcoholic, you might switch to opiates, or you might switch to marijuana, or you might switch to overeating, or you might switch to exercising to an extreme, or maybe be a workaholic. Is that all a bad thing? I'm not so sure, right? I think I would clearly want to be a workaholic as opposed to an alcoholic, just because I'm going to do better. I'm not saying it's perfect. It's not perfect to be a workaholic, because you're still stressing out your system, right? And what we really want to do is be comfortable in our own skin and live that kind of a life where you're just inner joy is just there. I have that today, even though I do work a bit too much. And I'm at least I'm aware of it, and I'm trying to. I had a doctor who told me, well, now, Dr. Paul, when do you have a day off? Well, I said, I'm off every weekend. No, she says, when you don't open your computer, you're not doing blogs and interviews and emails. And I thought to myself, never. I had not had a day off in forever. So anyway, I may not have answered your question.
But no, you did, and it's interesting. I mean, because I can relate to the workaholic thing. You know, I think once you start, I was working since I was 12. You know, so when you start and you it's just kind of a way of being. It's an easy pattern to get kind of hooked into. Well, gosh.
Yeah. Well, and it's rewarding, right? I mean, we get positive accolades from work, whether it's the financial reward, or a lot of times we're thankfully, I think what you're doing is so impactful and important that I experience the same feeling, like you feel rewarded because you're making a positive difference in the world.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I love what I do, and that, you know, that's the whole thing. It doesn't feel like work, and you probably feel the same way. Yep,
exactly. And so that's okay, I think. We'll cut ourselves a little slack there.
Well, and Dr. Paul, we could talk for hours. I mean, your book is so informative. It has such great information. I can't suggest it highly enough. Where can people connect with you and learn more about your work and be part of your community?
Great question. So my main website is drpaulapproved.com. That's DRPAUL approved.com. And that will link to everything I'm doing. The book, addictionspectrum.com, will get you there. And I also did a huge summit this summer, just this last month in August. And if you go to theaddictionspectrum.com, you will be able to get access to that summit. Now, because it just wrapped up, for the time being, there is not a free access, but I'm going to get that reestablished. It'll be up for sure. So that will give folks access to 28 interviews I did of world experts in the area of addiction, natural healing, natural health, and then that's a huge resource as well. I'm planning to establish an online community for those of us who have any sort of addiction issues and just want to connect.
That's exciting. Well, I know on your website, because we talked about supplements and things like that, people can actually get those on your website.
Yes, I've started a new brand because things like, for example, that vitamin D with K2. It's so important that you get those two in combination. And so there's certain combinations of nutrients that really make a difference. And so I've started a new brand, Dr. Paul's Restoration. drpaulsrestoration.com is a place where you can get a supplement or several that deal specifically with the need for energy, the need for those key basic nutrients. And so check that out as well. I've got numerous products there that are really, really helpful in your journey to restore your health.
Well, I've got a few in the shopping cart already because we were talking about vitamin D. It's like, I probably should get some of that. But, gosh, Dr. Paul, I just so appreciate the time that you've spent with us today to share your wealth of information, insights, and, of course, your book, The Addiction Spectrum. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, Marianne, thanks so much for having me. You're a delight to speak with, and thank you for getting this message out to your audience.
Well, thank you, Dr. Thomas. It has been such a pleasure to talk with you about your new book, The Addiction Spectrum, a compassionate, holistic approach to recovery. It's a discussion we all need to have, and this is a very profound book, so I'm so glad we got to spend time talking about this. The Addiction Spectrum is available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and all indie bookstores. If they don't have it on the shelf, just ask for them to order it for you. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.